Ja, herzlich willkommen zurück zu dem letzten Block, zum Endspurt.
Welcome back to our last part of our today's event of the Franco-German Energy Forum. Thank you for participating and welcome back also to our online participants. We would now like to speak about the financing of the microeconomic implementation of the energy transition in Europe, and I am delighted to tell you that we have a keynote by Deborah Revoltella, Director of the Economics Department at the European Investment Bank. Before she had worked for the UniCredit Bank. Welcome, Deborah Revoltella.
Thank you very much, and it's really an honor to have an opportunity to address you with this keynote speech and talk about investing in the energy transition at times of repeated shocks. I'm really sorry I cannot be with you, but I hope that I'm happy that through this virtual connection, I still can bring some insight to the discussion. So the points that I want to make is really that investing in the energy transition at times of repeated shock is particularly complicated. The energy shock is particularly strong in Europe and show the structural fragmentation of the European energy market. In fact, what we see definitely that the shock hit Europe for geographical region, for the structure of the energy market per se, in a particularly strong way. But on the other side, it also shows that structurally we were far away from having an integrated and sustainable energy market to start with. At the same time, I'm looking at the dynamic of what may firms do in terms of investment in the current period, that is again a period of repeated shocks. What we see and is that actually the corporate sector emerged from the pandemic relatively well compared to our previous expectations, but then the deteriorating economic environment is a constraint to investment, with constraint coming from the financing side to the uncertainty, and also with the concern related to decelerating demand. And despite the incentive generated for high energy shock, even investment for energy efficiency may enter into question, depending on firms' current position. So the question is really, what can we do on a policy point of view to protect green investment and in the next years? And the question is how to move our policy making from the short-term reaction to the medium-term, long-term thinking. And here I see the role of public sector and private sector. On the one side, the public sector has to continue to give guidance in terms of consistent and predictable policy with a vision on the future of the EU energy market that is important today for firms to continue to invest going forward. And then on the firm side, it's important to look at the risking instruments to support the firm to continue to invest at time of high uncertainty, but also enhancing awareness on the need for transformation, and particularly climate change transformation of the corporate sector and technical assistance. And then the other two policy points are addressing a barrier to investment that may be one actually of the factor that delays investment and the effectiveness of action, particularly at the moment in which it's mostly needed, and support to innovation and green innovation in particular. So that's what I will try to explain going on, and trying to go through the various elements in my keynote speech. If we go to the next slide, I will just start with something relatively obvious for everybody who is in the room that are expert on this topic. With the net zero commitment, the EU energy mix has to change drastically. Not only, the issue is not only the diversification from Russia and from Russia import oil and gas, but it's the overall part of the energy transition that we committed to in terms of European commitment. And what we see now happening, in fact, is that the diversification, we have two forms of diversification that we have to consider. In the immediate, the diversification is the diversification from Russia. And that is already happening, and we see that there is actually quite a fast reaction in terms of the LNG infrastructure being taking place and transferring to LNG gas. But also a new source of provisioning of gas, a new agreement are ever being signed at surprising rapidly speed in the last few months. So this diversification is proceeding, and somehow is proceeding even faster than what everybody was fearing just a few months ago. But then there is the second diversification, and the second diversification is consistent with our climate commitment, and that requires the longer-term vision and remaining committed to the long-term vision, and requires a lot of investment to take place at this moment. And that's where the concerns on future investment lie. If we go to the next slide, this is just to show how on prices, and when we look at the retail prices and the effect on the corporate sector, on industry, it's really clear that the shock that European companies are facing is much stronger than that the major international partners are facing. And if you go to the next slide, that's a view of what is happening to energy prices. In the horizontal axis, we have the pre-crisis energy price average and every energy price for the corporate sector in different European countries. And on the vertical axis, we see the change in the last year, in the last year. And then what this graph basically tells us is that the EU energy market was indeed already fragmented before the shock. And this fragmentation is a structural fragmentation, and it's reinforcing itself with the effect of the shock. So my main point is that thinking about the medium to long-term solution, we really also need to think what integration of the energy market we want to have in the medium to long term. Because the fragmentation of the energy market actually also affects firm competitiveness, and again, is not only a matter of the effect of the current shock, but is a structural features behind the structural feature behind. If we go to the next slide, I would like to show you something that we see in terms of investment patterns at the moment in Europe, as it emerged from a survey that we run on an annual basis. We look at 12,000 firms in Europe, representative for each and every country by size and sectors. And this survey was run over the summer and already shows us quite strongly what the business sector is feeling in terms of pressure for investment and constraint to investment. What we see is that actually firms were coming out quite well from the pandemic. It was the first graph shows the expectation for 2022 sales compared to the pre-pandemic level. And you see a lot of green part. Who is green is actually firms that expect 2022 to report sales above the 2019 period, the pre-COVID period. And that's 70%, more than 70% of the European firms. And then we have those that are were hit by the pandemic and are still hit. Those is at 13%. So it's a relatively, compared to the shock that we have seen, it's a relatively small number of firms. And on top of this, we had some 11% of firms that are actually hit by the current shock. So hit by the energy crisis and already report a decline in terms of sales. But this tells us that coming out from what we have seen from the pandemic, actually a big chunk of European firms was relatively well, while the firms facing constraints were a relatively low a low percentage, also in terms of economic value added, that shows that the corporate sector was entering this crisis relatively well. But then the new shock comes in. On the one side, in the next, in the second graph, we see that actually firms already over the summer were seeing a deterioration of the economic condition quite sharply. In the next slide, we see that firms were expecting the external finance availability to deteriorate again, and as well internal finance availability to deteriorate. And the firms already over the summer, even if finance constraint comes with a delay, already over the summer, they were seeing an increase of the percentage of firms that are finance constrained, with an increase that actually shows a very strong dispersion across countries, which speaks of 16% of firms finance constrained in some of the European member states. So the tightening of financing condition was already coming with the expectation also of decelerating growth. If we go to the next slide, that's also showing part of what is happening on the corporate point of view and affecting firms' behavior. We ask in our survey what are the key impediments for firms' performance and investment activities. Here, what we see actually are three elements that peak the dynamics. We ask for more elements, but those are the three that end up being at the top of firms' concerns in 2022. The orange line is energy cost as a constraint for firms. As you can see, it's peaking very fast in the last 2 years, and it comes to be a concern for 83% of European firms in 2022. The other two are uncertainty and availability of skills. Availability of skills and uncertainty have consistently been impediment in the last 7 years, competing on the first position, but now energy cost comes up as a further constraint for first investment. Why are we worried about it? And that's, if we go to the next slide, that's some of our analysis is showing that actually energy prices, the concern for energy prices may be an incentive for firms' investment, and particularly for firms' green investment, and particularly investment in energy efficiency and renewable. But while high energy prices push up investment, green investment for firms, on the other side, uncertainty is pushing back investment overall. And what we find in our analysis is actually that the interaction between the energy price positive element and the uncertainty negative element actually work with the second one prevailing. So at the end, the drag from uncertainty is very strong for firms, even preventing some of the natural push for green investment and energy efficiency and renewable. And that's why, on a policy point of view, we think that it's particularly important in this moment to have very targeted instruments that may help firms by de-risking investment and then partially compensating for uncertainty and keep particularly the green investment going on. If we go to the next slides, these are more structural. In the next slide, this one, these are, we have been more on a structural point of view, tried to understand what is the perception of climate risk, physical and transition risk for European firms. And we can also compare it to what happens at the American level, as our survey also covers the US. What we see is actually three elements. At the European level, you have some 30% of firms that see the climate transition as a risk, and some 30% that see it as an opportunity. And you have 40% that actually don't see an impact. In reality, with our analysis, we recognize that most of these 40% are actually not aware how to interpret the climate transition for their own firms. So the fact of declaring not having an impact is most probably the effect of not being able to assess whether how important the risk is for the firms. What is positive is that over time this group is shrinking and moving out either towards those perceiving a risk or as an opportunity, but is shrinking, means that awareness among firms is increasing. And if we compare to the US, what we see is actually that in Europe, there are more firms thinking and betting on the climate transition, running on the positive side, try to get the upside related to the transition. If we go to the next, yes. Yes, what I wanted, maybe if I skip this slide then and go to the next one, I will just summarize the main point. On a policy point of view, I think we have to make sure that the short-term measure and incentive that we deploy now to face the crisis don't go against the long-term commitment. On a policy point of view, it's very important to have to keep the sense of direction and start developing and thinking on a long-term vision for the European energy market. And then on the firm side, to support investment, reducing uncertainty, supporting in terms of de-risking instruments, but also leveraging on private-public sector complementarities is extremely important, as well as reducing the red tape and barriers to investment. And again, the focus of innovation is crucial, and supporting innovation in this period is particularly important. And with that, I thank you very much, and I will continue to follow the discussion with great interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Revoltella. Vielen Dank für diesen Impuls. Und jetzt bitte ich die Diskussion.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. And I would now like to invite our panelists, Jean-Baptiste Pernaut, who is CEO of the Automotive Cells company. He's building gigafactories, and he used to work in Arriva in China and France. Welcome. I would also like to welcome Mr. Ralph Danielski, who is CEO of EPIX Spot, the European exchange for electricity. He used to work in the finance sector and then is changed to the stock exchange and now works at the Stuttgart Stock Exchange. Welcome. I would also like to welcome Mr. Christoph Reisfelder, who is a political scientist and is now working for Global Lead Energy and Climate Policies, and he is dealing with political questions of the Covestro company. And apart from that, we have Mr. Thomas Wering, who is joining via a video link. He is Executive Director in charge of strategy planning and evaluation of RTE. And he's also coordinating different interest groups and state organizations. Welcome, Mr. Renk.
Ja, und wir wollen eigentlich diskutieren, wie sich die hohen Energiepreise und die ehrgeizigen Klimaziele...
The topic of our panel discussion today are high energy prices and interactions and developments with ambitious climate targets. So I would like to start with you, Mr. Reisfelde, and ask you, since you are producing...
Ihr Einkaufsportfolio.
Oh.
Insbesondere interessiert uns natürlich, wie ersetzen Sie das Erdgas jetzt?
Plastics. I would like to ask, what is your strategy? Obviously, I cannot disclose too many details about our strategy, but on one hand, we speak about materials, commodities, and products produced from gas. There are obviously green alternatives, but these are markets that have still to be scaled up. We are also very dependent on gas when producing our products, and we are also trying to explore green alternatives. In the short term, unfortunately, there are only fossil options, and we can only use oil or maybe coal. We would also need to change our logistics and our strategy as a whole. So we are looking at several terawatts per hour, which will need to be replaced. This is all very, very challenging because we need to increase our energy efficiency. So that's what's bothering us in these times. I would like to add another question. As a company, you decided that by 2035 you will reach net zero. Do you think this is doable? We do think so. We haven't really spoken about concrete numbers, but we think that by 2030 we will reduce our numbers by 60%. These are all, of course, global targets. We are still convinced that we can reach our targets, but that means that we have to overcome the crisis, and we need answers provided by politics to us, and we need them really fast. I will go on now to another company, Covestro. You are currently building gigafactories for batteries because we need them for our energy transition. But obviously, we first of all need energy for the production. We need commodities. How optimistic are you at your company that you can live through these very difficult times of high energy prices, high commodity prices?
Oui, donc merci pour cette question. Peut-être juste en quelques secondes.
Thank you so much for your question.
Tout le monde ne connaît pas. Donc ACC est une joint
So
venture.
let's first talk about what ACC is. It's a joint venture of Mercedes-Benz and Total Energies, and it's a new company that was founded in 2022, and our goal is to produce batteries for the automotive sector. We are working out of 5 locations in France, Germany, and Italy, where we have production sites. And to come back to your question now, we already use a lot of energy, a lot of electricity, and we will do so in the future as well. And part of our company uses 600 gigawatt hours per year, so that is a very high energy demand. So we are, very much affected by current developments, which forces us to rethink our energy strategy when it comes to using gas, but also when it comes to what kind of electricity we use. So we have to source a lot of electricity from other stakeholders, but we try to generate a lot of that ourselves as well. So we are looking at new strategies to reduce energy costs for us. And we are also trying to save energy. And we do this, just as any company, we are trying to reduce energy as much as possible. When it comes to the resources we use, we're looking at a similar situation, really. We need a lot of cobalt, resources coming from all over the world. So we are following a diversification strategy, really. But we, of course, are aware of the fact that we can't get all the lithium that we need in Europe. So we're closely cooperating with Europe and with Germany, in particular in the Rhine region in Germany. Saw a new project being announced a couple of weeks ago, a lithium mining project. So what we are trying to do is do that, but also reduce our resource needs by expanding on renewable energies, becoming more energy efficient, and by diversifying our energy mix. That, of course, brings its own set of risks, because we do not want to become dependent on any one country, and I'm really thinking of China here. A lot of resources are produced there and are mined there, so that is a tricky issue for us. So we want to really make sure that we have security of supply. That is coming at a price, of course. And as I've mentioned a couple of resources, these resources have really gone up in price in the last 1 to 2 years, and it is something that is not sustainable for us. So we hope that this is going to go down, that energy prices are going to go down, and we know this, and we need this for a variety of sectors, for the electric vehicle sector as well, for example. So if we continue having high electricity prices, this is going to be a challenge for electric vehicles as well. Now, Mr. Danielski, I think you know the other side of the coin, really, working at the spot market in Stuttgart. Where do you see the biggest impact? Where does that play out? On the spot market? Well, it depends on the country and on the energy mix. We have about 1/3 of the overall European energy consumption traded on our trading systems in Stuttgart, and other countries, in France, for example, you have some legislation that guides this directly towards consumers, being sold directly towards consumers, but overall about 1/3, I'd say, on our stock exchange. And you really find everything there. It's producers, it's consumers, it's the grid operators, all the stakeholders in the energy sector, the municipal authorities, municipal operators, everyone really is involved there on our spot market. So I think we have a pretty good idea of how things have developed in recent months. Well, we'll come back to that in a bit, indeed. But first, I'd like to ask Thomas Verranck, because RTE really developed these scenarios for France on how to meet its climate goals and meet its energy demand. And how can an industrialized country such as France meet these goals by 2030, for example, meeting these energy goals, but also becoming climate neutral by 2050, looking at the current political circumstances? Well, thank you so much for having me today. And unfortunately, I'm joining you remotely. I wasn't able to be there in person. But to come back to your question, now, last year we did a comprehensive study on CO2 emissions. And as part of that study, we looked at energy consumption, energy generation, and the grid. So becoming climate neutral, CO2 neutral, means that we have to become independent of fossil fuels. And it also means generating energy from other sources. So what is currently happening is that we're looking at the potential prospects, what might happen. We have a couple of large-scale investment projects that would enable us to promote industrialization and to speed up the entire process to meet our targets for 2030 in the context of Fit for 55. There we do not really have that many funds available, but we have to increase the energy and electricity available. And in order to do that, we have to generate more renewable energies, photovoltaics, for example, the energy transition, nuclear power plants, wind energy. That is something that we've, very much launched last year in Belfort, where the president announced as much. So let's talk about the role of businesses and talk about what they can do. Looking at Mr. Reisfelder here, we just talked to Ms. Revoltella from the European Investment Bank. She touched upon a couple of these issues. So some companies seem to be uncertain about green investment. I mean, Mr. Reisfelder, asking you this directly from a bigger-sized company, how much are you actually investing in the green developments? Now, what I can say is this. We are investing in processes. So we've identified 3 areas of action. For one, we want to become more energy efficient in our own production. We want to develop innovative products with new production processes. And we want to shift existing processes to a more sustainable way and source energy more sustainable and source renewables. So that means especially when we switch to renewables, that means we probably will have to invest 100 million, round about 100 million per year on that. And there are 2 reasons why we're doing this. For one, we have a CO2 pricing system in Europe, and we will be able to save on CO2 certificates. We won't have to buy as many. And we currently have fairly high CO2 prices in the trading system. I think that that's going to continue being high prices. So we will have lower CO2 emissions. We will have to pay less for CO2 certificates. And secondly, the investment that we're doing is investment in the future. So it's not just our license to operate as a business, but it is also about investing in the future, because our industry, but the economy as a whole, is going to transition to a green economy. We might have to pay a bit more right now, but ultimately, I think in the long term, we will have a competitive advantage. Okay, that's interesting, and companies will play an important role there, if I understood you correctly. Now, let's talk about public investment, about government intervention. Let's talk about energy grid operators. I mean, some of them are privately owned, some public. So we know, I think, that we need energy grids. We need overhead lines. The Wacker Chemicals company manager recently said, well, we need overhead lines, we need this energy grid. And I think everyone would agree with that. We have to expand on that. If we want to have more renewables, we need a better, more expansive grid. We've heard as much this morning. Now, Mr. Verank, how are we going to achieve that? How can we do this quickly? Because it's, I think, not just a financial issue. It's also a question of technology, but also of the public agreeing to that. I mean, I know that we have that in Germany, and I guess it might be the same in France, that people, the public, don't really want to have an overhead line in their backyard, and maybe not underground either. Well, thank you so much for your question. You are completely right. The energy grid, new overhead lines, is really not just a financial issue. We are very, aware of, this kind of energy transition is financially sound and makes economic sense. But we also have to be aware of the need to expand the energy grid. We did a large-scale study looking at the time frame till 2050, and with 14 chapters of that study. You can download that online as well. And in chapter 10, we talk about the energy grid. And this chapter 10, is actually the chapter that is not really downloaded all that much. Everything else, hydrogen, climate change, people download these chapters, but online we've not really seen a lot of downloads of chapter 10 about the energy grid. In France, we don't really have an issue with our energy grid. I mean, looking at Germany, I guess the statistics might be different, but the differences between Northern Europe, Southern Europe, that's something that we're aware of. And ultimately, the goal is to expand our means of transporting electricity. We can't electrify all sources of energy, but electricity in France actually contributes to 1/4 of our energy consumption. So we use that in 1/4 of our energy consumption. If we want to increase that to 50%, we will have to look at how we actually achieve that. So I think we shouldn't really just think of one overhead line, one part of the grid. We actually have to look at our countries in their entirety. We need investment across the country. So if we invest into infrastructure in the north of France, we need to invest both in renewables and in the grid. We have to make sure that all the consumers have sufficient electricity and all the companies have sufficient electricity in the north. Secondly, we need to make sure that this energy, the electricity, is available at a reasonable price. So this is a challenging situation because energy prices or electricity prices have changed quite a bit. So we have to think of maybe also taking a closer look at the electricity markets. We need a sensible electricity price for this. Well, thank you so much. Now, Mr. Ninieski, we talked a bit about this earlier, that we, of course, need to expand the energy grid. We need investment for a transition to renewables. And you mentioned that the energy market can actually help speed up the energy transition. What did you mean? How exactly is the market going to support that? And are the regulatory frameworks the right ones to help that along? Well, the regulatory framework has been mentioned today, and especially when we talk about energy market design, the energy grid. I mean, that's a long-term investment, but there are other products that we can talk about. And at our stock exchange or our exchange, we are also trading renewables, of course. And we see that the producers of renewables like to trade their electricity and their energy on our exchange. That is more complex, of course, all in all, compared to financial markets, because you can't really store that energy. You have to consume it as soon as possible and pretty much consume it right away wherever it is generated. And that means that, when we talk about renewable energies, it very much depends on the weather. That is very volatile. So one part of trading renewable energies efficiently means that you reduce the time frame to purchasing the energy that you need just a couple of minutes before you actually need it. And that could be just 5 minutes. So we are looking at purchases with the day ahead, so for the next day, but it could be really down to 5 minutes. So if we are trading this 5 minutes, that's really amazing if you think about how complex this is, that you buy electricity and 5 minutes later you can actually use that here in this room. So it is not about looking at the electricity generator that is producing that in, say, Finland, but someone that is producing and also transporting that. So that is the market design itself. And there's been a lot of change there. We are really trying to get closer and closer to the delivery date. We are at near time level, and we're really aiming for real time. So we're 5 minutes into the future there. Other countries are looking at 15 minutes. Then we are also investing a lot in innovation. And we talked about grid capacities, something that really is a bottleneck in Germany, but not just in Germany, and in general, really. And the interconnectors that connect the European markets, the national markets, with one another, have a certain capacity, and they're limited in capacity. And when you look at the volatility that comes with renewables, that is a congestion there, getting electricity through, and we are trying to buffer this with the flexibility markets. So the grid operators try to really work around this. We could have power to gas operators or battery operators that support this, and they help really ease these congestions and try to also avoid the high cost that comes with these congestions. And last but not least, we also established certificates of origin in the European market. So you can basically demonstrate the share of renewables in your energy mix, and that's about €9 right now. It was 2.5 to 3 euros a couple of months ago, so this really has increased. And we are convinced that such a certificate of origin for the generation of the electricity that you're using is an important step to push renewables further, and that is part of the market approach. Now, we'll come back to the market in a bit. You talked about batteries, and of course, electric vehicles, electric mobility is an important area, and batteries, of course, play an important role in that. So you mentioned challenges, the resources that you use in production, but on top, you have the United States that launched a huge investment and subsidies for investment in gigafactories. And, where does Europe stand comparably?
Oui, donc il y a énormément de défis dans l'électromobilité, puisque...
Well, there are a lot of challenges when we talk about electromobility. We want to really leap forwards towards electrification of that sector. And currently, when we look at the markets, the only providers are in Asia. That's one of the first challenges. So we have to get this production back to Europe. And the same goes on a regional level. So it's not just the production, but the entire supply chain has to be moved back to Europe, and that is a huge challenge and means a lot of investment. We're going to invest 7 billion euros in the construction of gigafactories. So we have to relocalize, bring back the entire value chain. Then there is a technological challenge because the factories are not as they were in the past. I mean, we have to look at battery efficiency and battery performance, and we have to look at supply sovereignty in a way. And of course, there is a human factor at play here as well, because you have to change the mindset of entire populations. In the past, wherever you had automotive manufacturing, you now have to train employees on new processes. So we have fewer manual process steps, fewer process steps compared to building an internal combustion engine, for example. And that means that this also affects the training and the studies of engineers and of researchers. But I think competitiveness is probably going to be the biggest challenge, because this is one area that is very much affected by high prices and inflation. The prices for some of these components have increased up to 2021, for example. We've seen an annual decrease of prices due to a variety of factors, but now prices have actually increased again due to an increase in resource prices, due to inflation as well. So the biggest risk really is that people bought an electric vehicle and you can't afford it anymore, and it's not competitive anymore. And you need to provide subsidies that to an extent that is not feasible anymore. Then we have a second challenge when we look at Asia and competitiveness with Asian companies. We have seen that energy prices in Asia have not increased as much as ours have. So again, there is a certain risk for electric vehicles, namely that manufacturers in Europe lose out against a different system, a different pricing system, a system that does not work with the same premises and the same approach that we do when it comes to environmental protection regulation, for example. So I think competitiveness for batteries is a huge challenge, a long-term challenge, and going into 2023 as well, certainly. Okay, that was a great summary of all the challenges, and of course these forecasts, they've changed, they've adapted, and Mr. Franck, I would like to ask you about RDE's forecasts, the studies that you did before the energy crisis, before prices increased dramatically. So what would you say? Are those forecasts still something that we can use? Are they still realistic?
Oui, elles le sont pour plusieurs raisons.
Yes, indeed. They are realistic for different reasons. We published something that said that we want to reach climate neutrality by 2050, and obviously we need to act economically, and we need to do so now for climate action reasons, but also for economic reasons. In other words, this current crisis is above all a crisis of fossil fuels.
devient économiquement plus intéressante. D'ailleurs, j'ai tendance à penser que
And this transition to climate neutrality and zero net emissions is much more interesting now. So now we have better chances to reach these goals than earlier when we only had those climate goals. Because today we have the impression that these reasons for tackling climate change are maybe not strong enough. So in a way, this is positive, but we observe something else in addition to that. There is an optimistic and a pessimistic thesis. Optimistically spoken, because the gas prices have increased so much, we are extremely dependent. Therefore, we need to very quickly achieve energy transition. And then, on the other hand, we have the pessimistic view, which says because the energy prices have increased, we need more subsidies, and because energy prices are rising, companies need to bear higher costs, which will affect investments into in energy efficiency and the transition to other types of fuel. This is the negative view. So we will see in the end which one is true. What we will do is the following. Next year, when we will publish our forecast for 2050, we will have an intermediate goal for the period until 2035. This is something that we do on a regular basis, these intermittent goals, and we will see that there are lots of contradictions. And we will also take into consideration that this energy transition will be a difficult task, but if we will try to check it against reality, to draw lessons from our past experiences, and something that has already been said several times today, if we want to succeed in this transition, we also need to offer industries the conditions that allow them to access energy, to remain competitive, and to have manageable costs for electricity. That means we have to translate it into our prices. So that it becomes a policy of reindustrialization on the European continent. This will have a positive effect not only on our climate goals, but also on the resilience of our industry and economy.
Je suis prudent, mais je pense qu'on doit essayer d'être optimiste.
I'm quite cautious, but I think we have to try and remain optimistic, because we do have the means to do so. The costs are manageable, and we have to just provide a warranty for industry. So there is a commitment to climate policy goals for the government, for the companies, but the pressure to remain competitive is great. So how optimistic are you that we will be able to bridge this gap between the pressure and competitiveness? Mr. Danielski, yes, I wanted to intervene earlier because I am on the positive view side. We have to use this innovation power in Europe. We will be able to make investments out of this crisis. This is an interim period now. Of course, it is difficult. It was a huge shock for us, what we have experienced this year. It was completely unpredictable. It was a perfect storm, if you want. This war of aggression, the scarcity of gas, and so on. But in addition, the problems in France with nuclear power plants, this also, they play a very important role for the supply in Europe. And now the drought in the summer and the depletion of water tanks, all of this was a shock in supply, and over the next couple of months, and most probably also until 2024, so next winter and the one after, we will feel these symptoms that are, of course, quite dramatic right now, but they will become weaker with time. And we will need to fix the price, even if it hurts. We have heard today a lot, oh, well, the prices have risen. This is the reality. This is not a speculation. At the present moment, this is our reality. And we need to know how high the temperature really is, if you will. You don't want to say, we stop at 37 degrees. Well, I don't have any fever, but you're feeling poorly and you don't know why. You need to know, yes, it's not working very well. We are feeling poorly. And then you do something against that. And the same goes for Europe. Mr. Panot, yes, I wanted to say exactly the same thing. I am cautiously optimistic. We will not manage to do this. We will not succeed in doing this without accompanying the industry, without help from the state, from the government. We need compensation measures to counteract to this imbalance, and we need to increase the visibility of our industries. There are already mechanisms in place today that can compensate for the rising energy prices, but these are very short-term measures until 2022, the end of 2022, 2023. We invested in the construction of new industrial sites, and there were warranties in place for a period of 10 years. There were no visibility as to what could happen in 3-4 years' time, but this is exactly what the industries need. They need reliant structures and visibility. Yes, I think I have already said that we are trying to be very cautious with our goals, and we are trying to be more resilient towards future crises. You have very briefly mentioned the transatlantic component, the IRA and the US. So we do hear this very often. I think there are two camps. The one is very critical towards the US, and they need modernization. They have a very different approach. And we should just critically look at that and try to learn from that instead of just saying this is bad. And then there's a different approach. We're trying to focus on green energies for less money. And I think we haven't managed to do so in Germany because this business case for the green energy simply developed out of the high prices for fossil fuels. So I think we have received the right incentives. 2 days ago, Germany and France have published their joint agreement for the European structures, and I think these are very important lessons for the industry. It is. We can see how quickly things need to change. Things for which and developments for which we would have needed much more time before the war. So now we are acting much faster and do so successfully. And we've seen that we're able to do so, and we are quickly coordinating what is possible, what's not possible, and we need a political framework. And I think I would even accept political frameworks that are maybe not perfect and not ideal, and then try to adjust it, than not having a framework at all. Very well, thank you very much. I will look into our audience. If you have any questions or maybe critical points that you would like to explain. I can see a hand raised. Please introduce yourselves. Good afternoon. My name is Robert Conrad, BTT Technology. I would have a question for Mr. Penot. I would like to ask you how much electricity you need to create a battery. To produce a battery, we need about 5% at a price from 2 years ago, and now probably 10 to 15%, maybe even more. But traditionally, we need about 5% only for the production of the battery. And then there are additional aspects, chemical components, that obviously increases this percentage. So in total, we probably look at a percentage of 15%. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the audience or maybe from the chat room online? So the question is, how can we use this the potential for flexibility? What kind of legal framework do we need for that? Yes, I would like to start with this energy-intensive industry. How can we increase flexibility? Now, of course, we need legal framework. We don't have a new framework in place at the moment after abolishing the old system. And there it used to be that different sectors were able to offer you different products. And now it has been abolished, so we have a gap on the market. And obviously, this is a topic, and since I am representing the chemical industry, we used to live in a different world, if you will. We spoke of a continuous use of grids. It was a completely different world where we had a constant production. And this obviously changed a lot. We are trying to expand our flexibility, but we need to think about how we can not only reach industrial flexibility, this is only one component of our work. Batteries, for instance, will be used a lot. Other energy products will be introduced on the German market or on the French market. And I think you will play a great role on the EPIX spot, on the spot market. And obviously, the spot market is playing a great role. I can purchase a profile, a risk, and then try to balance it out in my portfolio. So we need market regulations, and we need to look at our flexibility options in different areas, and it does look different for different materials.
Vielleicht setze ich da gerade nochmal auf, weil Sie haben schon sehr perfekt beschrieben.
If you allow, I would like to expand on this topic because you have described this very well. Obviously, we need a legal framework, we need a basis in order to be able to act in future. You have already spoken about this. We are currently having discussions with the Bundesnetzagentur, the Federal Network Agency, in Germany in order to create this basis. Other countries in Europe are much further advanced as compared to us because they have recognized that this is really needed, and Germany is still lagging behind. Would one of you like to add anything to that? Would you like to add anything, Mr. Verenk? No, not me. I just can say that I fully agree with my colleagues. We need flexibility. This is something we need to introduce to guarantee. Electrifying processes means also that we need to have the capacities to adapt their use, and the electrification 2020 to 2030 means that we have to be more flexible. We need to guarantee more flexibility in the system, but I'm quite optimistic that we will manage to do so. Now let me have a look into our chat room. One question to Mr. Panot and Mr. Verenk. These ambitious goals of electromobility, what do they mean for the charging infrastructure and the electricity grids? Would you like to start, Mr. Panot? Yes, I can start. Maybe I'm not an expert to speak about details of the charging infrastructure, but it's true that this is one of the main barriers, if you will, for electric vehicles. And since we are producing batteries, what does this actually mean for us? A great example from the last couple of years is the increase in demand for batteries. So we would have thought this means that the rollout of electric vehicles would increase, but most drivers only drive a couple of kilometers per week. And then when we speak about energy efficiency in housing, maybe we could one day also speak about energy efficiency of batteries, because we are currently building a fleet of vehicles that is overdimensional as compared to the need, because these charging stations are not, consumers do not really trust in these charging stations, and we think that 350 kilometers would be enough, and the financial incentives would be gigantic for consumers and companies. So I think there is a big difference between investments on the one hand and the density of the infrastructure grid on the other, the possibility to recharge your vehicle. And yes, I agree 100%. I cannot really add anything to this because this is 100% correct. Occasionally, we read articles on the topic of was this grid sufficient, and but in the long term, the question is about the batteries and the charging stations and pillars. Electromobility is developing very fast with very small batteries that have to be recharged often. However, we don't see any particular difficulties in this area. There is a great link between electromobility and the possibilities to recharge your vehicle. If consumers decide to buy larger vehicles, then of course we can produce bigger batteries that need to be recharged less often. In 2019, we conducted an in-depth study for electric vehicles, and we found out that most vehicles do not really move throughout the day, throughout one day. So how often are they really used? So either we produce batteries in order to promote the use of batteries, of vehicles, and it is doable, or we create electric vehicles with batteries that are maybe more complicated to produce, and this will have more complicated results because these batteries aren't used as often, and so our investment costs have to rise. One question to Mr. Reisfelder. What role do CCU and CCS play for Covestro? I think decarbonization is the wrong term. I hear this very often when I come back from Berlin. I'm told I should speak about defossilization rather than decarbonization. So CCU will have to be part of the solution in order to produce effective vehicles. I think there's no way around it. If you ask me, obviously we are trying to also try secular fuels, but how available are they? And if they're not available, then we'll need alternative sources, and this is when CCU comes into play, along with hydrogen. This has to be discussed on a political level as long as we do not have a clear framework, and as long as we don't know how much biogen we will have available, how much materials we can recycle, and so on. So we cannot set ourselves artificial limits. Other regions don't do this either. So we will have to discuss this in details in the next couple of weeks and months in Germany and at international level, especially when we speak about CCU. And maybe one more thing. Obviously, everything has to be counted in a greenhouse protocol approach. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we ran out of time. If you have one very, very short question. Yes, in the check to Thomas Vérinck, and I ask you to respond very briefly. The French energy grid does not have this north to south structure, but is still very weather sensitive. What can we do about it? I'm not sure I understood your question very well, but no, there is no gradation from north to south. There is a consumption depending on the temperature. So the heating system is very well developed. If temperatures are lower, we need more thermal plants, and in France we don't have enough of them. In 2022, we had a very low production coming from nuclear power plants, but it's just a development. We tend to import more when temperatures fall. What we would wish for is a European system, because today we do not have a national system. Our systems are interconnected or integrated, and this tendency cannot be reversed. This is true for France, for Germany, for other countries. Yes, indeed, we can see how important this European integration is. Thank you very, very much. To sum up, we have to invest out of this crisis, but we also need a vision on the government's part for the country. This was extremely interesting. Thank you also for your questions. And we will now go over to our very final part, and we'll have an overlook presentation by Amory Lovins.
Ja, wir machen einen Ausblick.
Well, we are going to hear about an outlook, the overlooked climate change mitigations. And we are delighted to have Amory Lovins with us today, a co-founder of the Rocky Mountain Institute, and someone that really, talked about climate change before anyone else did. And he's joining us today on Thanksgiving, and it is fantastic that he's joining us today, despite the fact that it's a holiday. And he really is one of the people that thought very early on about an energy transition, authored a lot of books and studies, designed a variety of products, assets, facilities, and he got so many awards, there's no way to list them all. And let's welcome him with a round of applause. Amory Lovins, the floor is yours.
Meine Damen und Herren, Mesdames et Messieurs, thank you for the honor of summarizing some important climate mitigations that were provided in peer-reviewed literature to IPCC, but not mentioned in its April Working Group 3 report. These opportunities also help deliver energy security, resilience, public health, equity, and prosperity. 11 years ago, 60 colleagues and I described in the business book Reinventing Fire how to triple U.S. energy efficiency and quintuple renewable supplies by 2050, reaching a 2-degree climate target $5 trillion cheaper, all led by business for profit. The first 11 years of that 40-year journey are pretty well on track, green actual versus blue proposed. I think largely because the private sector smells the $5 trillion on the table. That's exactly what should be happening. But our assessment proved conservative, understating or omitting important climate change mitigations. IPCC reports that about 40 to 70% of needed global decarbonization can come from new energy savings. Thus, around 1975, U.S. government and industry all said that the energy needed to make $1 of GDP could never drop. A year later, I heretically suggested it could drop 72% in 50 years. So far, it's dropped 61% in 46 years, with 28 times the cumulative impact of the doubled renewable output. Yet, just the efficiency innovations already added by 2010 can save another threefold, twice what I originally thought, at a third the real cost. Today, even that heresy looks conservative because optimizing buildings, vehicles, equipment, and factories as whole systems, not as piles of isolated parts, can often make very big energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into increasing returns. Vigorously applied, such integrative design, as documented in the reference at the bottom, could roughly quintuple global energy productivity over the coming decades. Making energy savings several-fold bigger can actually cost less because it uses not more but fewer devices and not fancier but simpler devices, more artfully chosen, combined, timed, and sequenced. Familiar resources like copper ore bodies and oil reservoirs are finite and depletable assemblages of atoms. In contrast, energy efficiency resources are infinitely expandable assemblages of ideas, depleting only stupidity, a very abundant resource. Yet, integrative design is not normally recognized, taught, delivered, expected, rewarded, or included in our climate policy models, except sometimes just for buildings. In 2010, our integrative design to retrofit the Empire State Building saved 38% of its energy, as shown in green, later 43%, with a 3-year payback. 3 years later, our cost-effective Denver retrofit saved 70%, making this half-century-old government complex more efficient than what was then the best new U.S. office, That in turn is only a third as efficient as RMI's passive net positive no mechanicals office near my 1983 home and banana farm, which has the same attributes and has grown 80 banana crops with no heating system and temperatures dipping to minus 44 degrees. This Bavarian building uses 2/5 less energy than an RMI's office. Yet these technologies all existed more than a decade ago. What mainly improved is not so much technology as design. In Europe, IPCC reported that about a decade ago, the best new buildings on the left and retrofits on the right could save up to at least 90% of their energy use without costing more per unit of saved energy. The biggest savings are toward the right, and the lowest costs are toward the bottom. The big vertical cost scatter only shows the business opportunity to conform inferior projects to best practices. Those keep improving. Now the Dutch Energiesprong technique can install a customized, industrially prefabricated tea cozy around your house or apartment building, profitably super outsulating it to net zero performance in as little as a single day. Even in tropical climates, passive building design and good ceiling fans can keep you feeling 16 to 19 Celsius cooler, and the efficiency of big mechanical space cooling systems can at least triple, all with excellent economics. But a revolutionary experiment 3 years ago revealed a startling alternative. Purely radiative cooling kept people comfortable outdoors in sweltering Singapore without moving, drying, or cooling the air. Instead, in a shaded but open-ended pavilion, people stayed cool just by radiating their body's far infrared rays into panels circulating slightly cooled water and shielded from the humid air by thin plastic film. Radiant temperatures of 23 to 25 degrees could deliver comfort in air up to at least 32 degrees at 80% relative humidity. Such mild cooling could often be done passively with no electricity. Indoors, the Swiss fist-size heat pump can deliver 6 to 15 units of hot water per unit of electricity. This Swiss electric cooking system uses vacuum-insulated pots and other innovations to cook better with 2.5 to 4 or more times less electricity than induction cooktops. Industry uses half the world's energy and electricity. RMI's latest $60-odd million worth of industrial redesigns typically found about 30 to 60% energy savings on retrofit, paying back in a few years, and far outperforming the orange oval zone in the upper left, where most energy service companies deliver disintegrated design. In new projects, integrative design generally yielded 40 to 90+% energy savings with lower than normal capital cost. For example, most electricity runs motors, have to run pumps and fans. Just better pipe and duct design can save 80 to 90+% of the friction and therefore of the pump and fan energy and capacity, 97% in my house. If done everywhere, this could save about a fifth of the world's electricity, or half the coal-fired electricity, with payback times typically under a year in retrofit and instant in new build. But this is not in any standard engineering textbook, official study, industry forecast, or climate model. Why not? Because it's not a technology. It's a design method, and few people yet think of design as a way to scale rapid change. To wring out friction, we simply use big pipes and small pumps, not small pipes and big pumps. And to eliminate elbows and their friction, we lay out the pipes first, then the equipment, laying out supply pipes as if they were drains. We bend mines, not pipes. Then 35 kinds of motor system improvements, 28 of them free, can more than double the savings from the two standard methods and at 4 to 5 times lower unit cost, raising the fluid handling savings to about 1/3 of global electricity. And each unit of friction or flow we save in the pipes saves about 10 units of fuel, costs, and emissions at the thermal power station. We can also save industrial energy by saving the energy-intensive materials that industry makes. 2 papers last year showed how smarter structural design can profitably save at least half the world's cement and steel that now release 15% of global CO2. That emits another twofold gain from better specification and application, together saving about 3/4 of the concrete before we adopt any lower carbon materials or production processes. Here are some examples of better structural design. Substituting tension for compression structures typically looks better, costs less, and uses 1/8 the tons. Pouring concrete into curvy fabric forms, not rigid prismatic forms, can often save over half the concrete by putting strength and stiffness only where they're needed. And then the weight savings compound because you need less strength to hold up less weight. An airy 3D printed bridge can carry mainly its users, while massive concrete bridges support mainly their own weight. This stainless steel bridge was 3D printed. Most importantly, floor slabs are about half the total weight of a typical mid or high-rise building. A 5-centimeter thick folded concrete floor slab or a shallow vaulted dome can replace a 30-centimeter thick flat slab, cost less, and save 3/4 of the cement and all of the steel. Thin floor slabs and better energy design can then save a further 15% of core structural materials and 3/4 of the energy in a new mid or high-rise building while increasing net rentable space by a stunning 55%. How? Designing out a vertical meter of mechanical plenum at each story, as you see at the left, lets 3 stories with normal 2.8-meter ceiling height fit in the current height of 2 stories. Cost, complexity, and time all fall dramatically. As we use less steel, a new Swedish way to remove copper contamination also qualifies recycled steel for premium uses. And while hydrogen steelmaking is making impressive strides, an emerging 60-degree electrochemical steelmaking process designed for pour ores and variable renewable electricity may prove even quicker and cheaper. Integrative design can also make automobiles' electrification faster and cheaper by first making them several-fold more efficient. Most of the energy needed to move a car is caused by its weight, and saving 1 unit of energy at the wheels leverages 4 or 5 units of fuel saved in the tank. This lightweight carbon fiber electric car that I drive was profitable from the first unit sold 9 years ago. Its carbon fiber was paid for by needing fewer batteries to move less weight, and fewer batteries recharge faster, needing less electricity and less infrastructure. The saved weight snowballs spectacularly. Assembly saves 2/3 of the normal capital and water and half the energy, space, and time. It eliminates automaking's 2 hardest steps, and it's much better for the workers. The quadrupled efficiency to 1.7 liters equivalent per 100 kilometers on the German test comes without compromise and with many driver advantages. Platform efficiency can also cut battery mineral needs by up to 2 or 3-fold, or much more with 5 other multiplicative efficiencies. No official mineral study considers this. BMW finished producing this model in June. I hope the tooling can be sent to Ukraine to help rebuild its car industry. But Bloomberg New Energy Finance reports that China's lightweighting strategy for its 2030 flagship cars includes carbon fiber structures, displacing 4/5 of their steel. Another game changer is heralded by 2 hypercars due to enter the market within months, both from firms I advise. Most drivers will not need to recharge this composite 2-seat 3-wheeler or this Dutch 5-seat 4-wheeler because they're about 3 times as efficient as a Tesla. So their topside solar cells capture enough energy for ordinary daily driving without plugging in, bypassing charging infrastructure and its electricity supplies. Diesel heavy trucks efficiency can triple, but Tesla's battery electric Semi beats that with 40% sleeker aerodynamics, lightweighting that offsets battery weight, and a 2-year US payback. Transcending the 3- to 5-fold more efficient jetliners designed a decade ago by Boeing, NASA, and MIT, this flight-tested air taxi with fully laminar flow could fly nonstop from Paris to Aspen with 1/6 the operating cost of a business jet and 1/8 its fuel use, even before electrification. A double-size version already designed is ideal for emerging point-to-point route architectures and looks set to blow up aviation's business models. A hydrogen version has also been designed. Next comes a novel lattice and membrane technique to make aerostructures over 98% lighter, yet tougher, cheaper, and lower drag. In total, oil became uncompetitive even at low prices before it became unavailable even at high prices. Saving a barrel in U.S. mobility cost $18 in 2010 and under $7 last year, heading below zero in the next few years. Today's spiking fuel prices act like a huge global carbon tax. Putin just blew up the fossil fuel era, not only by speeding the shift to renewables, but also by fossil fuel pricing that speeds efficiency. Finally, a little on electricity. Standard models say we need giant fossil-fueled or nuclear capacity to keep the grid reliable as it becomes renewable. But that leaves out most of the grid balancing solutions. Their full competitive landscape includes 10 carbon-free ways, conceptually sketched here, to balance the grid across all timescales, not just big batteries in magenta and without fossil-fueled backup in red. Your actual costs will vary, but bulk storage comes last, not first. So we need not wait for a storage miracle, though some are emerging, and the market isn't waiting. The first two boxes on the left, negawatts and flexawatts, are both about 3 times bigger than had been thought, yet cheaper. Indeed, this portfolio is so ample that its costliest option, giant batteries, do not actually look necessary. For example, the U.S. state of Texas has a 99% isolated grid with no big hydro dams. A 2050 summer week of expected Texas loads can get much smaller and less peaky with profitably efficient use. Then we can make 86% of the annual electricity with wind and solar cells and 14% from dispatchable renewables. This 100% renewable supply can then match the load by putting surplus electricity into 2 kinds of distributed storage worth buying anyway: ice storage, air conditioning, and smart bidirectional charging of electric autos, then recovering that energy when needed and filling the last gaps with unobtrusively flexible demand. Then you have 100% renewable electricity every hour of the year with no bulk storage, and with only about 5% left over to make hydrogen or ammonia to decarbonize other sectors like heavy transport and industrial heat. So the economics should be excellent even at today's prices. More than 660 peer-reviewed papers show comparable 100% renewable results for most parts of the world. Contrary claims are generally artifacts of defective models. The ultra-reliable 62% renewable German grid operator, 50 Hertz, and its Belgian partner Elia, capably analyzed Europe's Dunkelflaute. With east-west interconnectors, these dark doldrums turned out to need backup power for only up to 1 or 2 weeks per year, totaling about 6% of winter electricity use, readily supplied by existing gas-fired capacity, burning green molecules like hydrogen made at other times from surplus solar or wind. The often claimed need for months or seasons of storage was not found, partly because this study included more of the 10 solutions that I sketched 2 slides earlier. Just European Union demand response could cut renewable power's over or under supply days by 90%. Making existing buildings more energy efficient can shrink and shift their peak demand. The U.S. National Renewable Energy Laboratory, competing efficiency against storage, conservatively found that this can cut investments by an order of magnitude by displacing long-duration hydrogen storage and green electricity to produce it in 4 key U.S. regions that supposed need disappears. The 2011 Reinventing Fire Synthesis, whose first 11 years' progress began these remarks, showed how at historically reasonable speed, the U.S. by 2050 could shrink electricity use 25%, despite all-electric automobiles and a 2.6-fold bigger GDP. This quadrupled electric efficiency would cost 1/10 today's average retail price of electricity, so we should buy far more efficiency than just fourfold better. Conservatively, we also omitted many savings from integrative design. Using electricity many-fold more productively lets renewable supplies, now 95% of the world's net additions of generating capacity, displace fossil and nuclear generation more quickly, easily, and economically. That option and the others I've described are not yet being counted. No climate choice model includes most grid balancers, nor integrative design, nor competes efficient and timely energy use against supply, nor fully competes distributed supply. No standard model lets renewables learning curves work, so assumed renewables are severely overpriced and under forecast, driving spurious needs for costly and risky climate solutions. But I hope these examples show that despite the many exciting supply-side opportunities, most of the white space is on the demand side. Integrative design could help surpass the IEA's Sunderberg ambition to save electricity twice as fast, and might even spread visually and virally at the speed of social media. We're not short of climate mitigation methods, we're short of deployment and discernment. Drowning in energy innovations, we cling to the familiar while overlooking many better solutions, probably totaling more than we will need or can afford. We're now entering the tricky phase of distinguishing useful and competitive innovations from pre-stranded assets. As our models improve and our vision clears, I suspect the standard projections of electricity, hydrogen, and investment needed to mitigate climate change and provide lasting energy security may prove grossly exaggerated. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Danke vielmals.
Vielen Dank, Amory Lovins, für diesen spannenden Einblick. Und
thank you so much to you, Amory Lovins, for this very interesting presentation on design and on how this can help us accelerate the energy transition. Now to our closing statements. And actually, Mr. Patrick Reichen was supposed to talk to us, but Franziska Brandner is replacing him today. Ms. Brandner, you have the floor. Yes, thank you very much. I'm not Patrick Reichen. My name is Franziska Brandner, and I'm replacing him at short notice. You can imagine what he is currently working on. It's not really easy to do all these gas caps and prices. Therefore, I have the honor to speak to you here today at the end of this event. I wasn't here today throughout the day. Mr. Wenzel was here, but I heard that there were many great and very interesting discussions on something that couldn't be more topical. I'm therefore delighted that we were able to organize this event here at the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, because we need more sides to discuss these topics between Germany and France, topics that have been existing between our two countries for many, many years, and we were trying to duck them, to avoid them. But once a crisis hits, we need to have a reality check and realize that we can no longer avoid the difficult topics. And when it comes to managing the crisis, and sometimes we have different opinions, it is extremely important not to forget the future over the crisis. And this is what you did here today, especially this last presentation that said, never let the urgent kill the important. I think this is something that we all need to work on and sometimes work hard on in order to achieve progress. I'm very happy that when Mr. Habeck that Mr. Habeck visited Paris this week, and tomorrow he's meeting Ms. Born to speak about this topic in hydrogen. I think it makes sense to see and find ways and paths that will have an effect and be efficient long term, that we work on these solutions so necessary for this transition, not only here for us, but for all of Europe. And I am confident that we can find a good solution for this, even though it may need some more work before we do this. And this is why it's great that we have the same position in terms of efficiency in order to achieve progress in industry, to create a basis for renewable energies, new technologies, and to foster them. There are many, many points that we have in common, and when we need to think about how to secure energy supply in the future, and hopefully this energy will come from Europe and elsewhere in future. I think we agree on that, and this is positive in this debate. So on this note, I would like to thank the office for having organized this event, for the work that you are doing there on a daily basis. And I would like to invite you to have drinks with us after that, which I hope you will enjoy. And hopefully we will not try to avoid difficult and maybe painful topics. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank, Frau Brandner, für diesen Ausblick.
Thank you so much, Ms. Brandner, for this outlook. I have the honor, on behalf of the Franco-German Office for the Energy Transition, to thank you, obviously, above all those who worked on organizing this event. The organizers, the three ministries, the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, the French Ministry for Energy Transition, and the Foreign Office that was also represented here. Thank you very much also to the interpreters in the booth.
Sie haben einen großartigen Job gemacht. Das war sicher nicht ganz.
You did very well. I'm sure it was not very easy. And if you wish to read the presentations, they will be available as of next week on our website, and obviously you will also receive a summary as a participant of this event. I would also like to mention an upcoming event, or upcoming events that are planned for the future. Please consult our websites, the website of the Franco-German Office for the Energy Transition. We have heard today how important this Franco-German cooperation is in the context of the energy transition, and I very much enjoyed this very interesting event with great incentives. Thank you very much, and enjoy a wonderful evening, and maybe a glass of wine or aperitif. Thank you very much.